The world fell apart on a Tuesday. Misread. We have your results. The doctor's calm voice, precise as a scalpel, severed the last taut nerve in my mind. I sat on a cold plastic chair, my hands crushing the thin report. The medical jargon and arrows on the page looked like snarling monsters lunging at me. It's late-stage stomach cancer. The doctor adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses. His tone was devoid of emotion, as if he were merely informing me of inclement weather and suggesting I take an umbrella. There are already signs of metastasis to other organs. Surgery would be of little value. I recommend palliative care. We'll focus on maximizing your quality of life for the next few months. The next few months. My voice trembled so alien it felt like it belonged to someone else. Yes. Optimistically 3 to 6 months. He scribbled something on a chart without looking up. Is your next of kin here? We should have them come in. I need to explain the treatment plan and necessary precautions. Next of kin. The word struck my chest like a sledgehammer. My next of kin, Julian Vance. Right now, he was likely standing in his spacious, light-filled office, gesturing at a grand architectural model, basking in the glory and applause that came with being the new prodigy of the architectural world. I rose unsteadily, bowing my head slightly. Thank you, doctor. I understand. I don't have anyone to bring in. Leaving the office, the sterile smell of the hospital corridor assaulted my senses, making my eyes sting. I braced myself against the cold wall each step, a heavy dreamlike effort as if wading through cotton. 10 years. It had been exactly 10 years since I married Julian Vance. I had watched him transform from a fresh-faced college student in a plain white shirt on campus to the elite professional in bespoke suits he was today. No, watched wasn't the right word. In the grand blueprint of his life, I was the unseen but once critical foundation. I had given up my spot in a prestigious graduate program, abandoning my own promising path as a designer. I had willingly locked myself in the castle of our marriage. He had said, Evelyn, one of us has to make a sacrifice for the household. It would be a shame for someone as talented as you to become my shadow, a ghost designer in my firm. Instead, be my rock. When I succeed, everything I have will be yours. I believed him. For 10 years, I wore an apron for him, managed every aspect of our home so he could dedicate himself to his work without a single worry. When he pulled all-nighters over blueprints, I stayed up with him, brewing endless cups of coffee. When he hit a creative wall, I would use the professional instincts I'd never quite let go of to make a few quick, deft strokes on his sketches. Often that small touch of mine would illuminate his entire concept. In those moments, he would pull me into a euphoric embrace, calling me his muse, his goddess of inspiration. But even goddesses grow old and sick. I took out my phone and dialed the all-too-familiar number. Hello, Julian's slightly annoyed voice came through. I'm in a meeting. What is it? Make it quick. Julian, I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to sound as calm as possible. I got my test results. The doctor says it's terminal stomach cancer. A long silence stretched over the line. I could hear my own heart drumming against my ribs. I pictured him in my mind frowning, not out of concern but out of annoyance. The rock that had been his support was now crumbling, about to become a burden that would drain his money and energy. Which hospital? His voice returned, chillingly detached. I'll have my assistant Harrison head over and take care of things. Take care of things. I gave a bitter smile. Julian, you don't need to come. Let's just talk at home. There's something I need to say. Fine. I'll be there by 7. He hung up without a single word of comfort or concern. Returning to the place I called home, an unprecedented sense of alienation washed over me. Every table, every chair, every houseplant had been chosen and placed by my own hands. On the living room wall hung a photo of us taken when he won his first major architectural award. In the picture, I was smiling the happiest smile in the world, as if his success was my entire universe. I sat in a daze for hours. Finally, the sound of the keypad at the front door beeped and Julian walked in. He tossed his expensive, custom-tailored jacket onto the sofa. He carried the aura of a world-class professional and a faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume. It wasn't mine. What did you want to talk about? He asked, without looking at me, pouring himself a glass of water. I pushed the diagnostic report, now damp, with the sweat from my hands across the coffee table toward him. He glanced at it, then took a long drink of water, his Adam's apple bobbing once. Harrison already briefed me. Evelyn, I'm sorry to hear that. There wasn't a trace of sorrow on his face, only a placid calm, as if a great weight had been lifted. So, is this what you wanted to tell me? He asked. I looked up, truly studying the man before me for the first time. He was still handsome, but his eyes held a coldness and distance I couldn't comprehend. Julian, we've been married for 10 years. Yes, 10 years. So, he set the glass down and finally met my gaze. Evelyn, you're a smart woman. You know there's no point in dwelling on the past at a time like this. One has to look forward. Look forward. My voice rose uncontrollably. I don't have a forward, Julian. I have a few months left. Don't you get it? He nodded. Then he pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase and pushed them across the table toward me. That's why I'm helping you. Sign this. It's for the best for both of us. At the top of the papers, the sharp words divorce agreement were printed. The blood in my veins turned to ice. My trembling hands flipped through the pages. The terms were simple and cruel. I, Evelyn Reed, was to voluntarily relinquish all claims to our shared assets acquired during the marriage. This included the condo, the cars, and his shares in the company. I was to leave with nothing. What is this? I looked at him, incredulous. It means exactly what it says. A cruelty I had never seen before flickered across Julian's face. Evelyn, the feelings between us died a long time ago. You know it and I know it. I didn't bring it up out of respect for our past. But things are different now. I can't let a dying person drag down my life and my career. Drag you down, I laughed, a hollow sound that threatened to turn into tears. Julian, your career, which one of your projects, which one of your awards doesn't have my blood and sweat in it? Have you forgotten you were about to fail your senior thesis project until I stayed up for 3 days straight fixing your model, the Starfall Tower? Your first big commission. I was the one who found the spark of inspiration for you in dozens of crumpled drafts you'd thrown away. And now you say I'm dragging you down. My accusations did nothing to stir his guilt. Instead, he stood up, looking down at me with eyes full of contempt. Evelyn, stop deluding yourself. Those little inspirations, those weir visions, weren't they just a housewife's way of feeling important? A woman who's been out of the industry for a decade? What do you think you still know? He leaned in, whispering so only I could hear. Those ideas of yours. Without me, they would have been nothing but trash on a piece of paper. It was I, Julian Vance, who gave them life and made them reality. You should be thanking me. He straightened up, brushing away imaginary dust from his suit. This home, the company, the shares, I built it all myself. It has nothing to do with you. As a humanitarian gesture, I've left you $20,000 in the agreement. It should be enough for you to arrange your final affairs with some dignity. I sank back into the sofa, all strength gone from my body. So that was it. My decade of devotion was nothing more than a pathetic, self-satisfying comedy in his eyes. I had given my youth, my talent, my everything, and in return I got a humanitarian payout of $20,000. Why are you doing this to me? I mumbled, not knowing if I was asking him or myself. Because you have no value anymore, he delivered the heartless answer. But I have a brilliant future ahead of me. Chloe is waiting for me, and I don't want to upset her because of your situation. Chloe Sterling, the daughter of his firm's chairman, the young woman who always sweetly called me Evie. Ah, so the faint perfume was hers. I finally understood. This wasn't a sudden decision. It had been planned for a long time. My illness was just the perfect excuse, the perfect reason to discard a worn-out piece of clothing without any burden. Sign it, he said, his tone an undeniable command, as he pressed a pen into my hand. I looked at his handsome, merciless face, then at the agreement that erased 10 years of my life in an instant. Suddenly it all felt so pointless. Arguing, accusing, begging in front of a man like this, it was all a ridiculous, powerless act. My heart had already died with the diagnosis. I said nothing more. I simply took the pen, and with the last of my strength, signed my name at the bottom. Evelyn Reed. The ink bled into the paper, putting a final period on 10 years of marriage. He took the agreement satisfied. The look in his eyes was that of someone finally disposing of a piece of trash. The money will be in your account tomorrow. I'll give you 3 days to pack your things and get out. With that, he turned and left without a backward glance. The door slammed shut, severing two worlds. I sat alone in the empty, familiar living room, a hollow mannequin whose soul had been ripped out. A sharp, cramping pain pulsed in my stomach, a grim reminder that my life, like my marriage, was rapidly approaching its end. A small star in the abyss of despair. I don't remember how I left that apartment. During those 3 days, I packed nothing. The decorative pieces I had so carefully chosen, the plants I had lovingly tended, the moment Julian declared me worthless, they all became strangers to me. I walked out with only my ID and a bank book containing the $20,000 settlement. I wandered the glittering city like a lost soul, checking into the cheapest motel I could find and surviving on the blandest convenience store meals. The stomach pain grew more frequent, each spasm feeling like a dozen knives twisting inside me. I would curl up on the bed, my clothes drenched in a cold sweat, enduring the agony. I didn't go to the hospital. I knew it would only prolong the suffering. The city's brilliant neon signs did nothing to pierce the darkness in my heart. Julian's words echoed like a curse. "You have no value anymore." He was right. A dying woman with no job, no family, and no health. What value could I possibly have? That night, the rain came down in sheets. The drumming of the heavy drops against the window sounded like a final funeral dirge for my miserable life. The pain returned more ferocious than ever before. I was on the verge of losing consciousness. A single thought consumed me. End it. Just end it all. I stumbled out of the motel, letting the cold rain soak me to the bone. Walking aimlessly, I found myself on a magnificent bridge spanning the river. It was one of the city's landmarks and one of Julian's past triumphs. He had once pointed to it and told me, "See, Evelyn, this is the miracle we built together." How ironic. I stood at the railing, gazing at the churning water below and the blurred city lights in the distance. The wind and rain lashed at my face, stinging my skin. The railing was ice cold, but I felt nothing. Death seemed so tempting in that moment, a gentle embrace promising to end all my pain and misery. I took a deep breath and climbed onto the railing. The wind grew stronger, making my body sway. One more step and I would bid farewell to this despairing world. "Goodbye, Julian," I whispered, closing my eyes. "May your future be bright. May you never again be held back by a burden like me." Just as I was about to let go, a faint but insistent force tugged at the back of my coat. Startled, I turned around. I met a pair of eyes clear and dark, starkly defined. It was a little girl no older than 6 or 7. She was soaked to the bone, her small body trembling like a leaf in the wind. Wet hair was plastered to her pale face, and her lips were blue with cold. But her eyes shone with an astonishing light as if they held 2 stubborn stars. In her hand, she clutched a rain-soaked, crumpled $5 bill. "Excuse me, miss." Her voice was thin and weak, tinged with a barely perceptible fear and plea. "Do you have to die right now?" I froze, unsure how to react. A child stopping me from dying by asking if I had to do it right now. The scene was absurd, dreamlike. "Kid, I think you've got the wrong person," I said, my voice laced with annoyance. "Let go. Don't waste my time." "I don't have the wrong person," the girl insisted, her grip tightening as if with all her might. "Miss, please. I need to ask you for a favor." "A favor?" I almost laughed. "Can't you see I'm about to jump off a bridge? I can't even take care of myself. How am I supposed to help you?" The girl was momentarily speechless, but quickly looked up at me again, her gaze stubborn, her eyes welling with tears. "Before you die, could you please come to my school's parent-teacher conference? Just once." She said this while carefully holding out the wet $5 bill as if offering a precious treasure. "Miss, this is for your trouble. Please. My teacher said if my parents don't come tomorrow, she might have to have me transferred." Her voice was choked with sobs. "Right now, you're the only adult I can ask." I looked at the child. At her eyes filled with tears but still unyielding. At her worn-out sneakers a size too big with their toes split open. At the crumpled $5 bill in her hand. My heart, the heart that had already been given a death sentence, felt a sharp, unexpected pang. Was this child like me, abandoned by the world, a girl fighting to live and a woman trying to die, meeting on this cold, rainy bridge? 2 lonely souls from different worlds drawn to each other. My body was already numb from the cold and pain. The courage I had mustered to die seemed to be evaporating with this persistent interruption. I slid weakly off the railing and collapsed onto the wet pavement, a pathetic sight. Seeing me come down, the girl's eyes lit up with a spark of hope. She squatted down beside me, still trying to press the $5 into my hand. "Miss, you promise, right? I didn't take the money." I just waved a weary hand. "What's your name, Stella?" "Stella." I repeated the name silently. "Your family, why don't you ask them to go?" At the mention of family, the light in her eyes dimmed. She lowered her head and said in a small voice, "I don't have a family." My heart sank again. "All right," I said, my voice so weak I could barely hear it myself. "I promise. I'll go to your parent-teacher conference tomorrow. Consider it my last good deed before I leave this world. Maybe it'll make my journey to the other side a little smoother." A huge smile blossomed on Stella's face. It was so pure and brilliant, it seemed capable of dispelling all the storm and darkness in the world. She nodded vigorously and carefully tucked the $5 into my pocket. Thank you, miss, she said earnestly. You're a good person. A good person. I gave a bitter smile. What kind of good person doesn't even value her own life? That night, I didn't return to the motel. I followed Stella to where she lived, a dark, damp basement apartment in a dilapidated neighborhood on the edge of the city slated for demolition. Inside, there was little furniture besides a small bed and a worn desk. The air was thick with the persistent smell of mold. This was her home. I curled up on a decrepit sofa in the corner, listening to the rain outside and Stella's even breathing, and stayed awake all night. The pain in my stomach still tormented me, but strangely the desire to die wasn't as strong. Perhaps because I had made a promise about tomorrow to a small, strange girl. A temporary family against the world. The next day the rain stopped and the sky cleared. A ray of sunlight streamed through the small basement window, creating a mottled pillar of light in which dust motes danced. I was awakened by a rustling sound. Opening my eyes, I saw Stella already neatly dressed in her school uniform on her tiptoes, trying to comb her messy bob. Her uniform was faded but clean. Seeing that I was awake, she smiled a little shyly. You're awake, miss. I struggled to sit up on the sofa. My whole body ached, as if my bones were broken. The rain and cold from the night before had left me in terrible shape. I checked my phone. 7:30 a.m. An hour until the conference started. Yeah. My voice was hoarse. I went into the tiny bathroom just big enough for one person and saw my reflection in the mirror, pale, gaunt, with dark circles under my eyes. I gave a self-deprecating smile. Showing up at a child's parent-teacher conference looking like a ghost? I'd be lucky not to be mistaken for a fraud. I did my best to look presentable and followed Stella out of the basement. We bought a hot dog and a coffee from a street vendor. Stella ate her hot dog very slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the most delicious food in the world. Miss, what's your name? She asked, looking up as she sipped her lukewarm water. Evelyn. You can call me Evelyn. Evelyn, she repeated, then lowered her head and said in a small voice, Thank you, Evelyn. I said nothing, silently eating my own food, which tasted of nothing. Stella's school was an ordinary public elementary school. The building was somewhat old, and the classroom for the conference was already filled with parents. Most were well-dressed, gathered in small groups, talking about their children's grades or where they were going for summer vacation. Their faces beamed with confidence and pride. Our arrival was like a drop of water in a pot of clear oil, instantly drawing everyone's attention. I was pale, wearing a worn-out t-shirt stretched from washing. Stella kept her head down, clutching the hem of my shirt. I could hear the whispers and feel the disdainful, scrutinizing glances of the other parents. Their voices were just loud enough for me to hear. Who's that? Is that Stella's mom? Look at what she's wearing. I heard she's an orphan living with some relatives. Well, clearly not very good relatives. Look at her, she looks like a sick chicken. Can she even take care of a kid? No wonder Stella's grades are so terrible. I ignored their whispers, took Stella's hand, and sat in an empty seat in the back row. Stella lowered her head even further. I could feel her small hand trembling. The conference began. The teacher was a woman in her late 30s, with black-rimmed glasses and a stern expression. She started by praising a few students with excellent grades. The parents of those children smiled, proudly sitting up straighter. Then the atmosphere shifted. Her gaze turned toward us. Next, I want to talk specifically about Stella. Her voice suddenly grew louder, laced with displeasure. This semester, Stella single-handedly dragged down our class's average test scores more than any other student. And it's not just about grades. Her attitude in school is also a problem. She's withdrawn, doesn't get along with others, and has zero interaction with her classmates. She's always daydreaming in class. Every parent's gaze fell on me like a searchlight. I could feel the schadenfreude and contempt in their eyes. The teacher adjusted her glasses and continued in an arrogant tone. Stella's guardian, are you here today? I slowly raised my hand. Ah, so you're her guardian. The teacher scanned me from head to toe, her eyes filled with disdain. Ma'am, I don't know what your relationship is to the child, but as her guardian, you are being incredibly irresponsible. Do you even care about her education? If you can't handle her, you shouldn't let her interfere with the other children's learning or ruin the atmosphere of the entire class. Her words were like poisoned knives, stabbing me. And the little girl beside me, I felt Stella's body tremble more violently. She bit her lip hard, tears welling in her eyes, but she stubbornly refused to let them fall. In that moment, an unfamiliar rage surged from the depths of my dead heart. I, Evelyn Reed, could accept being abandoned by Julian. I could accept having a terminal illness. I could accept losing everything and dying. But I could not accept a 7-year-old child being publicly humiliated like this. I slowly stood up. Under the gaze of the entire class, I looked calmly at the teacher on the podium. "Hello, teacher." My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. "I'm Stella's Aunt Evelyn Reed." The teacher, clearly not expecting me to dare stand up and challenge her, paused for a moment, then frowned. "Is there a problem? Did I say something wrong?" "Something wrong," I repeated softly. Then I said, "Teacher, you just said Stella is withdrawn and doesn't get along with others. May I ask, as her teacher, have you ever tried to find out why she became like that?" "That's her own problem." "A problem with her upbringing at home," the teacher said, her tone becoming slightly defensive. "Is that so?" My gaze swept across the other students in the classroom, finally landing on a heavy-set boy. I remembered Stella telling me that he often snatched her school supplies and tore her homework. "Teacher, let me ask you, are you aware that Stella is frequently bullied by her classmates? Her pencil case is broken and her textbooks are torn. Have you ever noticed?" My voice remained calm, but it carried an undeniable force. The teacher's face began to stiffen. "Let me ask you again," I continued. "Have you seen the bruises on Stella's hands and arms?" I quietly took Stella's hand and showed everyone the bluish marks under her sleeve. "Is it not a bit much to expect a child who has lived in fear and been subjected to school violence for a long time to be cheerful, outgoing, and positive?" "What are you talking about? This is slander." The teacher's face turned beet red. "How could there be violence in school? You're just trying to evade responsibility." "Whether it's slander or not, we can find out by checking the security cameras," I said calmly. "And about her grades. How can a child who doesn't even feel safe be expected to concentrate on her studies? You're an educator. In your eyes, are students just numbers? Are their mental health and their growing environment not part of your responsibility?" My words echoed clearly in the quiet classroom. All the parents stared at me, their gazes no longer filled with contempt, but with surprise and complex emotions. The mother of the heavy-set boy I had pointed out, a large woman dripping with luxury brands, suddenly jumped to her feet. She pointed a finger at my nose and yelled, "What nonsense are you spouting? My son is a good boy. He would never bully anyone. You look like you're just here to extort money because you're broke." I ignored her shouting, and just looked quietly at the teacher, waiting for an answer. The teacher's lips trembled, but she couldn't utter a single word. My questions had left her speechless, and beads of cold sweat formed on her forehead. "Aunt Evelyn." Beside me, Stella quietly tugged on my shirt. She looked up at me, her shining, tear-filled eyes holding a look of surprise, gratitude, and a light I had never seen before, admiration. I looked down and gave her a reassuring smile, then turned my gaze back to the podium, my voice, now laced with resolve. "Teacher, I didn't come here today to be lectured. I came here today to tell you that from now on, I will protect Stella. If I ever find out that she is being treated unfairly at this school again, we will meet in court." After finishing, I paid no more attention to the shocked faces around me. I took Stella's hand, and under everyone's gaze, walked confidently out of the classroom. The sunlight poured down on us. It was warm. For the first time, I realized what it felt like to be a shield for someone weaker. In the midst of my endless despair, that feeling gave me a tiny sliver of a reason to exist. Just the two of us in the world. Even after we left the school, Stella remained silent, her small hand clutching mine tightly as if she feared I would vanish the next moment. I could feel her tension and anxiety. She was probably worried that my defiant outburst in the classroom would cause even more trouble for her. "Aunt Evelyn, I didn't get you into trouble, did I?" she finally asked. After we had walked for a while, her voice as quiet as a mosquito's buzz, I stopped and knelt to meet her eyes. In the sunlight, her small face looked even paler and thinner. Her long eyelashes were still dotted with undried tears, making my heart ache. "You silly girl. How could you get me into trouble?" I reached out and gently wiped away her tears, speaking in the softest voice I could manage. "The ones who should be sorry are the adults, me and your teacher. We failed to protect you." Stella's lips trembled, and then tears streamed down her face like pearls from a broken necklace. She didn't cry out loud, just wept silently, her small body shuddering. I knew this was the way of a child who had suppressed her emotions for too long. I said nothing more, just opened my arms and gently pulled her small body into a hug. She was stiff at first, as if she hadn't been held like this in a very long time. But after a moment, her tense body slowly relaxed, and her small hands reached up to hug me back tightly. Burying her face in my shoulder, she finally began to sob her cries filled with grief, fear, and the long-suppressed pain. Holding her, I felt as if I were holding my past powerless self, the self who, under Julian's constant belittling and denial, had started to believe that everything was my fault. We stood on the sidewalk, holding each other for a long time. Finally, her crying subsided. "Are you hungry?" I asked softly. She looked up from my embrace, her eyes swollen from crying like ripe walnuts. She nodded a little shyly. "Come on. I'll buy you something delicious." I smiled, taking her hand. I took her to a small diner in a side alley. The place was small but clean, the air filled with the comforting smell of coffee and bacon. I ordered her the most expensive item on the menu, a full stack of pancakes with all the toppings and a plate of sausages for us to share. When the steaming pancakes arrived, piled high with fruit and whipped cream, they looked irresistible. "Go on, eat up before it gets cold," I said, handing her a fork. Stella stared at the lavish plate before her but didn't pick up her fork. "What's wrong? You don't like it?" I asked. She shook her head. Then she looked up at me and asked very seriously, "Aunt Evelyn, this must be really expensive, right? If we spend all our money, what will you do?" My heart sank. A 7-year-old child who should be carefree had already learned to be so considerate of others to worry about survival. "It's okay." I smiled and put a sausage on her plate. "I have money. You're a growing girl. You need to eat a lot." She looked at the sausage, then back at me. Only then did she pick up her fork and carefully take a small bite of a pancake. Perhaps she had been hungry for a long time because she ate very quickly, her small cheeks puffed out like a cute hamster's. Watching her eat, I found my own appetite returning. Even the pain in my stomach seemed to subside in this warm atmosphere. "Stella," I asked cautiously as we ate, "you said before that you don't have a family. What did you mean? The people who were supposed to be looking after you? They don't take care of you." Stella's movements paused. She lowered her head and poked at the pancakes on her plate with her fork. After a long silence, she finally said in a voice that was barely a whisper, "They're not my family. They're my dad's distant cousins. My mom and dad, they died in a car accident." A heavy weight settled in my chest. So she really was an orphan. "They weren't nice to me," she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, as if she were talking about someone else. "They said I was a burden, that I cost too much money. They didn't give me much to eat and I had to do all the chores. When the uncle was drunk, he would hit me." She rolled up her sleeve. Besides the bruises I had seen before, there were more marks, new and old, on her arm. It was horrifying. "I don't want to be in that house," she said, looking up at me. For the first time, her eyes showed a pleading emotion that was far beyond her years. "Aunt Evelyn, can you please take me with you?" I looked at her, unable to speak. Take her with me? Where could I possibly take her? I was a homeless, dying woman myself. I didn't even know where I would be tomorrow. How could I promise her a future? But looking into her expectant eyes, I couldn't bring myself to refuse. If I left, what would happen to this child? Would she be sent back to that hellish house to be abused and tormented until the starlight in her eyes was completely extinguished? Aunt Evelyn, seeing my long silence, the light in her eyes began to dim again. She lowered her head and gave a self-deprecating smile. "I'm sorry. I asked for too much. You've already helped me so much." She picked up her fork again and silently ate her pancakes, though much more slowly this time. Watching her small back, I felt a tightness in my chest. Julian had told me I was worthless. The doctor had given me a death sentence. The whole world had abandoned me. But just as I was about to give up on the world, this little girl had pulled me back from the brink of death with $5 and a request born of desperation. Maybe fate had brought us together, not for me to save her, but for her to save me. Stella. I made up my mind. She looked up, her eyes filled with confusion. "That meal cost $5, I said, looking into her eyes, speaking each word clearly and firmly. "The rest of the settlement, I'll take it as an advance payment for taking care of you for the next few months. So until I find you a new family, I'll be your temporary guardian. How about we become a family just for a little while?" I didn't know why I said it. Maybe I was crazy. A dying woman offering to take care of a child, it sounded like an absurd joke. But Stella took it seriously. She stared at me, her mouth slightly agape as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. A few seconds later, her eyes reddened again. Fat teardrops fell onto the pancake plate below, creating small splashes. This time, she didn't hold back. She opened her mouth and with a loud sob nodded her head vigorously. Through muffled words, she cried out, "Yes, yes, Aunt Evelyn, we're a family." She was crying and laughing at the same time. Her smile was more brilliant and radiant than any I had ever seen. Watching her, I found myself smiling too. And then I was crying. In this small, cozy diner, two souls abandoned by the world found a temporary sanctuary in each other with a plate of pancakes and a reckless promise. I knew the road ahead would be thorny. My health, my money, none of it would last long. But at least in this moment, my heart was warm, because I was no longer alone. We had a temporary family. Reclaiming a forgotten talent after, Stella and I became a temporary family. The first and most practical problem we faced was money. The $20,000 in my account was not a small sum, but in a city this expensive, it was far from enough to cover rent, living expenses, and the medical bills I might need in the future. Moreover, I now had Stella's future to consider. I couldn't just take care of her for a few months and then leave her all alone again. I had to earn money. Once that thought took root, it grew like a weed in my mind. For the first time in 10 years, a desperate desire to create something for myself and for someone else welled up inside me. But what could I do? A housewife disconnected from society for a decade. My education and career had stopped 10 years ago. I had no advantages in the job market. That night, after Stella fell asleep, I sat alone at the old desk staring at a blank piece of paper. I started to take stock of what I still had. I unconsciously picked up a pencil and began to sketch aimlessly. Familiar lines and structures flowed naturally from the tip of my pencil. It was a sketch of a building with elegant curves and an intricate traditional interlocking structure. I stared at the sketch, stunned. How long had it been since I had drawn something purely for myself? After my marriage, my pen had moved only for Julian, drawing in the styles he needed, finding breakthroughs for his stalled projects. My thoughts, my inspiration, all became his. Over time, I had even forgotten that I was once a student full of passion and dreams for architectural design. I remember my university professor patting my shoulder with a look of regret. "Evelyn, you're the most inspired student I've ever seen. It's too much of a waste for you to just stay at home." At the time, lost in love, I had thought my professor was old-fashioned. I believed that sacrificing everything for the man I loved was my greatest purpose. How ridiculous it seems now. From the very bottom of a worn suitcase, I pulled out a dusty portfolio. Opening it, I found all my design drafts from college. Under the lamplight, the lines on the yellowed paper were still full of life. Looking at them was like seeing my former self full of ambition and infinite longing for the future. I wasn't left with nothing. I still had my talent, my profession. This was something Julian could never steal from me. "Aunt Evelyn, what are you looking at?" Stella had woken up and was rubbing her eyes as she came over. "Oh, nothing. Just some old drawings," I said, smiling and stroking her hair. She came closer and peered at the drawings, pointing to a complex villa design. "This house is cool. It looks like it's made of building blocks." I laughed. She was right. The core design of that drawing utilized traditional joinery techniques, making the building itself look like a massive, precise work of art. It was my masterpiece from my college days. "Do you like it?" I asked. She nodded vigorously. "Yeah, I wish we could live in a house like this someday." "We will," I promised, looking into her eyes seriously. "I promise you. We'll have our own house one day. A house even more beautiful than this one." I knew it might be an impossible dream, but that night I regained something more important than money, confidence, and hope. The next day, I started searching for remote design-related freelance work on my old laptop. I didn't expect to land a big project. I just wanted to start with simple things like interior design or rendering. I created a simple resume omitting the 10-year gap and listing only a few awards from my college years. Then, like searching for a needle in a haystack, I sent it to dozens of companies and studios looking for online designers. Most of my emails went unanswered. The few replies I did get stopped once they saw my employment gap. I was a little discouraged, but I didn't give up. Every day, outside of taking care of Stella, I spent all my time looking for work and studying. I dug out my old textbooks and started rereading them, learned the latest design software, and tried to catch up on industry trends, reconnecting with the world I had been cut off from for a decade. It was a difficult time. The stomach pain often returned, but I gritted my teeth and endured it. I wasn't alone anymore. I had Stella behind me. I had to hold on. Finally, after a week, I received a reply. It was from a small interior design studio. The owner liked my hand-drawing skills. He said he would give me a chance and asked me to create a design proposal for a small studio apartment. The pay was only $500, not much, but to me it was a lifeline. I poured 120% of my passion and energy into it. I meticulously studied the floor plan, communicated with the client online for a long time to understand his habits and tastes, and then locked myself in my room and drew for 3 solid days. I created not only a detailed floor plan, but also hand-drew renderings for each space. My design maximized every inch of space while maintaining both aesthetics and practicality. A particular highlight was a convertible platform bed I designed, which could serve as a bed, a storage unit, and a low table. When I sent the proposal to the studio owner, my palms were sweating. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang. "Hello, is this Evelyn Reed, the designer?" A young man's voice full of surprise and excitement came from the other end. "I received your proposal." "Oh my God, it's brilliant. Absolutely fantastic." The client is beyond thrilled. He said this is exactly the home he's always dreamed of. At that moment, a wave of relief washed over me, followed by immense joy and a sense of accomplishment. "Miss Reed, your design skills are incredible, and there's such a human warmth to your work. Would you be interested in a long-term collaboration with our studio? We'd love to entrust more projects to you in the future," the owner proposed eagerly. "Yes. Yes, of course," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. After hanging up, I could no longer hold back. I covered my face and wept tears of joy. This wasn't about the $500. This was the first time since being declared worthless by the world that I had earned recognition through my own abilities. This feeling made me happier and more fulfilled than any expensive gift Julian had ever given me. "Aunt Evelyn, why are you crying?" Stella ran over, looking at me with concern. I wiped away my tears, smiled, and lifted her up, spinning her around a few times. "Stella, I'm not crying. I'm just so happy. We earned money. I got a job, really, that's great," Stella cheered, hugging my neck and planting a kiss on my cheek. That night, we splurged on takeout chicken and pizza. We celebrated this hard-won first victory like triumphant soldiers. I knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but at least I had taken the first step. Relying on my forgotten talent, I could finally begin to build a small but truly our own home for myself and Stella upon these ruins. The storm returns and vengeance is born. Thanks to the success of that first project, my design work gradually got on track. The owner of the interior design studio highly valued my talent and continued to introduce me to new clients. My income was still modest, but it was enough to cover our living expenses and rent with a little left over for savings. I took Stella and moved out of that dark basement apartment. We found a small but sunny studio in the same old neighborhood. Together, we bought secondhand furniture, painted the walls a warm beige, and placed a few small potted plants by the window. The place was small, but it was a space we had created with our own hands, and it felt cozy and safe. Every night I would sit at my desk drawing blueprints while Stella would quietly do her homework beside me. Under the lamplight, our two shadows stretched long, intertwining into a quiet and beautiful scene. My health also seemed to improve with my mood. The stomach pain still came occasionally, but its frequency and intensity had lessened. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could hold on longer for Stella. Stella had changed a lot too. In a stable environment and with my care, her face was filled with more smiles and her personality became much brighter. At school, some kids still pointed fingers at her because of the past, but now she was no longer afraid and would even bravely stand up for herself. Everything seemed to be moving in a good direction. I had almost begun to think that Julian and that horrifying past were part of another world entirely. Until that Saturday night. I had just finished a design proposal and was relaxing on the sofa with Stella watching TV. She loved the children's channel and I was watching with her. During a commercial break, the local news came on. "And now for our business report," the female anchor said in a clear voice. The Cloud Atlas Tower, a new landmark building in our city designed by the renowned young architect Julian Vance, has recently been nominated for the prestigious International Pritzker Architecture Prize. This is the first time an architect from our country has been nominated, signifying that our modern architectural design has reached a world-class level. Here is an exclusive interview with Mr. Vance. The screen changed and a face all too familiar appeared. Julian. He was wearing a perfectly tailored Armani suit, his hair impeccably styled, a confident yet humble smile on his face. He stood in front of a magnificent and uniquely designed skyscraper model, speaking eloquently. I stopped breathing. That model, the building called the Cloud Atlas Tower, its unique form rising layer by layer like auspicious clouds, its elegant lines blending classical charm with modern aesthetics. It was the sharpest knife plunging straight into my heart, because that design, that entire concept was mine. It was my senior thesis project from college, a project I had created with my best friend at the time, Sophia Finch, who was also Professor Finch's daughter. Our theme was airy in the clouds. We had dreamed of creating a poetic sanctuary in the sky for ourselves, for all the wandering souls in the city. Julian at the time was just a junior who helped our group with model making. How dare he brazenly steal the work that contained my and Sophia's blood and sweat to build his own fame? The design inspiration for the Cloud Atlas Tower came from my wife. Julian's voice on the TV was gentle and full of affection. She was a woman who deeply loved classical culture. She was the one who first gave me the concept of the clouds. Although we are now divorced, I want to take this opportunity to thank her. She is the one who made me who I am today. He spoke with such sincerity and affection, like a gentleman who, though betrayed, still held a grateful heart. I felt a wave of nausea. A bitter taste rose in my throat. "Aunt Evelyn, what's wrong? Your face is so pale." Stella looked at me with concern, tugging at my hand. I didn't answer, just stared intently at the TV screen. The interview continued. The reporter asked a few more questions, which Julian answered flawlessly. Finally, the reporter asked with a smile, "Mr. Vance, you've achieved great success in your career. Are there any new developments in your personal life?" Many people are curious. A slightly shy smile appeared on Julian's face. He looked at the camera and said slowly, but very clearly, "Yes. I would like to take this opportunity to thank another person. My current girlfriend, Chloe Sterling. She was like a ray of sunshine that illuminated my darkest days. When I was at my lowest, she was the one who stood by me, encouraged me, and supported me." He paused, his eyes full of love. "So I want to say to her here, Chloe, will you marry me?" Cheers and applause from the reporters and staff erupted from the TV, and I could no longer hold on. My vision went black. A violent, twisting pain seized my stomach, and I coughed up a mouthful of blood. The crimson liquid splattered on the coffee table and the floor. "Aunt Evelyn," Stella screamed, rushing to my side in tears. "Aunt Evelyn, don't scare me. What's wrong? You're bleeding." I collapsed onto the sofa, curling into a ball. Amidst the excruciating pain, my consciousness began to fade. I could hear Stella's terrified cries, could hear her running out, banging on the neighbor's door for help. The peace I thought I had found was a lie. The resignation I thought I had achieved was self-deception. Julian. He had not only stolen my design, my marriage, and my health, but he was now standing on my corpse to build his glory and stage a touching love story with his new flame. He treated me as if I were already dead, a symbol he could freely manipulate and consume. Why? Why was he allowed to enjoy everything that should have been mine with such ease? Why did I have to hide in a dark corner like a rat struggling? To survive only to die in obscurity? No. This injustice. I couldn't die like this. Just before my consciousness completely slipped into darkness, a thought as clear as a lightning bolt flashed through my chaotic mind. I cannot die like this. I have to live. I have to take back everything that belongs to me. I have to make Julian Vance pay for everything he has done. This was the first time, not for Stella, but for myself, that such an intense will to survive had erupted. The flame of vengeance was in that moment completely ignited. The prelude to war. When I woke up in the hospital, the world outside the window was cloaked in inky darkness. The white ceiling, the white sheets, and the familiar smell of disinfectant in the air all reminded me that I was back in the place I least wanted to be. "Aunt Evelyn, you're awake." Stella, who had been dozing by the bed, saw me and cried out with joy, her red, swollen eyes quickly filling with tears. "Where am I?" My voice was dry and hoarse. "The hospital. You threw up so much blood last night. I was so scared." "The neighbor helped us get here," Stella said, her small hand clutching mine tightly as if afraid I would collapse again. A doctor in a white coat came in, looked at me, and flipped through the chart at the head of my bed, his brow furrowed. "Miss Reed, it was a classic case of acute gastric hemorrhage." The doctor's tone was very serious. "Did you experience some kind of severe emotional shock? I told you. In your condition, emotional agitation is the most dangerous thing. It's like playing with your own life." I gave a bitter smile and said nothing. "Fortunately, you came in time, so your life is not in danger," the doctor sighed and continued. "But the situation is not optimistic. The cancer cells are spreading rapidly. You need to be admitted immediately for systematic treatment." Admitted. I subconsciously fumbled for the wallet in my pocket. All the money we had right now was less than $2,000. Hospitalization, treatment, the enormous cost was an astronomical figure for us. "Dr. I. Aunt Evelyn, we'll get you admitted, Stella interrupted before I could finish. Her gaze was unusually firm. I'll figure out a way to get the money. I looked at her. A 7-year-old child saying she would figure out a way. It was heartbreaking and moving at the same time, but in the end, I refused to be admitted. I knew my condition all too well. Hospitalization would only be burning money to prolong my life, not save it. I couldn't pour the little money we had left into a bottomless pit. I had more important things to do. After a few days in the hospital on an IV drip, once my condition had stabilized a bit, I insisted on being discharged, against the doctor's advice. Back home, the first thing I did was turn on my computer and gather all the information I could find about Julian Vance and the Cloud Atlas Tower project. Seeing the internet flooded with praise, calling Julian a once-in-a-century design genius, my heart felt like it was being sliced by a knife. That was all mine. That glory, that praise, it should have been mine. I couldn't just sit back and take it anymore. The next day, after dropping Stella off at school instead of returning home to draw, I boarded a bus heading downtown. I had to see Julian. I had to look him in the face and ask if his conscience had truly been eaten by a dog. Julian's current firm was located in a magnificent office building in the most bustling part of downtown Chicago. Standing below, looking up at the towering glass curtain wall, I felt as small as a speck of dust. The receptionist stopped me, a professional smile on her face. "Ma'am, do you have an appointment? I'm here to see Julian Vance. I'm his..." I paused, then forced out the 2 words. Ex-wife. The smile on the receptionist's face froze, quickly replaced by a businesslike expression. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Vance is in a meeting right now. You can't go up without an appointment." I had expected this. I didn't argue with her, just sat down on a sofa in the lobby. I decided to wait. From 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., I waited endlessly. During that time, countless well-dressed elite professionals came and went, their gazes at me filled with curiosity and scrutiny. I paid them no mind, just sat there quietly like a lifeless statue. Finally, just as I was about to give up hope, I saw Julian. He was surrounded by several people emerging from the elevator. He was still dazzling, full of vigor. By his side stood Chloe Sterling, smiling like a blossoming flower. They looked so perfect together. Julian, I stood up and called out to him. Julian turned his head. When he saw me, the smile instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a barely perceptible disgust and annoyance. "What are you doing here?" His voice was cold and wary. Chloe by his side also saw me. She linked her arm affectionately with Julian's and looked at me with innocent eyes, her voice soft. "Evie, what are you doing here? You look so pale. Are you sick?" Her voice was just loud enough for everyone around to hear. Instantly, all eyes were on me, filled with pity and sympathy, as if I were a pathetic woman who, after being abandoned, had shamelessly come to cling to her ex-husband. What a performance! I ignored her and just stared intently at Julian, asking word by word, "Julian Vance, the Cloud Atlas Tower design. What is going on? Do you have the courage to say it again in front of everyone, that it's your creation?" My voice wasn't loud, but it echoed like thunder in the quiet lobby. Everyone froze, including Julian. He clearly hadn't expected the always submissive me to publicly challenge him in such a setting. His face changed, but he quickly regained his composure. He even managed a helpless, placating smile. "Evelyn, stop it." He tried to approach and take my hand, but I recoiled in disgust. "I know our divorce was a big shock to you, but you can't just make up these wild accusations. The Cloud Atlas Tower is the result of my years of hard work. Everyone in the industry knows that." "Your hard work," I sneered. I pulled out a few yellowed sketches from my bag, my original drafts from college. They contained the most primitive form of the Cloud Atlas Tower. "Then how do you explain these?" The moment Julian saw the sketches, his pupils contracted sharply, but he quickly masked his expression. "Evelyn, I'm really disappointed in you." He looked at me with a pained expression, his acting so convincing I almost believed him. "I know you're talented, but you can't confuse your immature doodles from college with my mature work of today. You're not just insulting me, you're insulting yourself. You shameless bastard," I was shaking with anger. "Evie, how could you say that to Julian?" Chloe chimed in, at the perfect moment, her eyes red as if she were about to cry. I saw with my own eyes how much Julian suffered for the Cloud Atlas Tower. How can you just make baseless accusations against someone just because you're upset? That's so hurtful. Her words made the people around start whispering. "Oh, so it's the ex-wife making a scene. Look at her. She must be crazy for money." "Exactly." We all know what kind of person Mr. Vance is. How could he plagiarize? They say there's always a reason for pitiful people to be pitiful. I looked at the two of them perfectly in sync, twisting black and white, and felt a profound sense of disgust. Julian. I gave up arguing. I just stared at him with a look that was almost a curse. God is watching. Everything you stole one day, you will pay it back several times over. Just you wait. After saying that, I didn't look at his hypocritical face anymore. I dragged my tired body out of the building that felt like it was suffocating me. Behind me, I could hear Chloe's soft, comforting voice. Julian, don't be angry. Evie probably didn't mean it. She's just in a lot of pain. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. Yes, I was in pain. But my illness wasn't cancer. My illness was having been blind for the past 10 years, loving a man worse than an animal. In this confrontation, I had been utterly defeated. I had no evidence, no connections. My meager strength was no match for the elaborate empire of lies Julian had built. But I wasn't in despair. In Julian's fleeting change of expression, I had seen his unease and fear. The fact that he was afraid was enough. As long as he was afraid, I still had a chance. This war had just begun. Searching for a glimmer of hope, the crushing defeat of our first confrontation forced me to face a cold reality with my strength alone and a few old sketches. I couldn't shake Julian's current position. He was no longer the poor student who depended on me. He now had money, power connections, and most importantly, a fiancé with a powerful background. I had nothing. I couldn't act so recklessly again. I needed evidence. Conclusive evidence that would bring him down in one fell swoop, evidence he couldn't refute. But where could I find it? The only people who knew about the senior thesis project were me, Sophia, and Julian. Sophia was gone, and Julian would have surely destroyed any trace of evidence that was unfavorable to him. I was at a dead end. For several days, my spirits hit rock bottom. During the day, I forced myself to draw to earn money. At night, I sat alone in front of the computer, staring at the Cloud Atlas Tower blueprints over and over, trying to find a detail, a signature that only I would know that could serve as proof. Stella, with her sharp intuition, noticed my unusual mood. She stopped pestering me or being playful, and became exceptionally quiet and mature. She would help with chores she could manage, and when I looked tired from drawing, she would quietly bring me a glass of warm water. Aunt Evelyn, don't be so sad, she would say, sitting beside me with her chin in her hands, comforting me like a little adult. That bad man on TV, he'll get what's coming to him one day. Looking at her serious little face, I felt a warmth spread through my chest. That's right. I had her. I couldn't fall. Stella, do you remember your grandpa? I asked, a sudden thought occurring to me. Stella's mother, Sophia Finch, was my best friend. I had only met her father, Professor Arthur Finch, a few times during our university years. All I knew was that he was a highly accomplished architect, a master-level figure who spent most of his time on projects abroad. Sophia's talent was inherited directly from him. Grandpa Stella thought for a moment, then shook her head. I've never met him. After Mom and Dad died, nobody ever talked about him. I just heard he was in a very, very faraway place. A faint spark of hope ignited in my heart. If Professor Finch still had his daughter's belongings, could the original files for the Cloud Atlas Tower be among them? But I didn't have his contact information, and he was abroad. How could I possibly get in touch with him? I soon dismissed the thought as a futile fantasy. Life returned to a superficial calm. I was still busy making a living, still searching for a sliver of hope. The turning point came on an ordinary weekend. A call suddenly came from the relatives who were supposed to be raising Stella. It was the cousin, his tone extremely rude. He was short on cash and demanded that I send Stella's child support for the month immediately. It was then I remembered that Stella's official registration and documents were still at their house. Legally, they were still her guardians. This was a problem that had always worried me. I was afraid that they could take Stella away from me at any moment. I couldn't let that happen. I had to get custody of Stella as soon as possible. But that required money and a lawsuit, both of which were far beyond my current means. For now, I could only try to placate them. Listen, the thing is, I was about to make an excuse to buy time when an old but authoritative voice suddenly came from the other end of the line. Let me speak to Stella. I need to talk to my granddaughter. I paused. There was a brief scuffle on the other end, and then a trembling, tearful voice came through. Hello! Is that you, Grandpa? It was Stella. She was talking to her grandfather. I was so excited I almost jumped. I immediately switched the phone to speaker and had Stella speak into the microphone. Stella, my sweet girl, it's Grandpa. Professor Finch's voice from the other end was full of excitement and guilt. I'm sorry, Stella. Grandpa was wrong. I came back too late. You've suffered so much, haven't you, Grandpa? Stella could no longer hold back and burst into tears. Grandfather and granddaughter cried for a long time over the phone before they finally managed to compose themselves. Stella, where are you now? Are you all right? Professor Finch asked urgently. I'm with Aunt Evelyn. She's very nice to me, Stella replied in a small voice, glancing at me. Just then, a client's blueprint I was revising blew to the floor. I bent down to pick it up, took a pencil, and quickly made a few revisions to the structure. This action was captured by the camera of the phone Stella was holding. On the other end of the line, Professor Finch's voice suddenly stopped. After a few seconds, he spoke again, his voice trembling with extreme surprise and disbelief. Stella, the aunt next to you. What's her name? Evelyn Reed. Stella answered obediently. Evelyn Reed. Professor Finch repeated the name, his voice filled with complex emotions. Grandpa, what's wrong? Nothing, he said quickly, regaining his composure. But his next words made my heart pound. Stella, could you please put your Aunt Evelyn on the phone? I took a deep breath and took the phone from Stella. Hello, Professor Finch. It's me. My voice trembled slightly. You are Evelyn Reed. Professor Finch's voice on the other end seemed to pierce through the long years, carrying a familiar authority and a scrutinizing tone. Yes, I am. Were you just drawing? Yes. It's an interior design for a client. Another long silence fell on the other end. I could hear his heavy breathing. Evelyn, he finally spoke again, his voice carrying an undeniable command. You and Stella are to go to the airport immediately. Buy tickets for the next flight to Paris. I will cover all the expenses. Paris! I was stunned. Yes, Professor Finch's tone was firm. There are some things I must see with my own eyes and discuss with you in person. This is very important. It concerns my daughter. And it concerns you. It concerns Sophia and me. My mind was in a turmoil, but a strong intuition told me this had to be about the Cloud Atlas Tower. This might be the only chance heaven had given me. I couldn't miss it. Yes, of course, I answered immediately without a hint of hesitation. Professor, we'll leave right away. After hanging up, my heart was still racing. I looked at Stella, who was standing beside me with a bewildered expression, and pulled her into a tight hug. Stella, we have to go on a long trip, I said. A very long way to meet a very important person. Maybe, just maybe this time we can really get justice for me and for Sophia. The final counterattack and the stage of judgment. The plan to go to Paris ultimately failed, hitting the wall of reality. Stella didn't have a passport, and getting one required a guardian's signature. When I went to her relatives, they refused to cooperate unless I paid them $100,000 for their trouble. I didn't have that kind of money. When Professor Finch heard about the situation, he immediately changed his plans. You two wait there. I'm coming back. The wait was long and agonizing. I didn't know if Professor Finch's return could really solve anything. Meanwhile, the date of Julian and Chloe's wedding was fast approaching. The media was covering their wedding extensively, portraying Julian as the perfect man who had it all, career and love. Every time I saw news about him online, the hatred in my heart deepened. I couldn't just wait anymore. I felt like if I did, everything would be over. After consulting with a few free legal aid services, I made a decision I was going to sue Julian Vance. I knew the evidence I had was weak, and my chances of winning were slim. But a lawyer told me that even if I lost, I had to make it a big deal. If I could attract public attention and make people question the copyright of the Cloud Atlas Tower, there might be a chance for a turnaround. This was the last and only thing I could do. With the little money I had left, I hired a young lawyer and filed a lawsuit in court, accusing Julian of copyright infringement. When the news broke, the internet exploded. At first, public opinion was almost unanimously on Julian's side. Everyone treated me as a crazy woman, who, consumed by hatred after being betrayed in love, was trying to extort money from her ex-husband. She's just after the money. What a horrible ex-wife showing up to cash in on his success. Mr. Vance is so unlucky to be involved with a woman like her. Julian's PR team responded swiftly. They immediately issued a statement in which Julian portrayed himself as a victim harassed by his ex-wife. He stated that out of respect for their past, he had not wanted to make their private matters public, but my actions had seriously affected his reputation and normal life, leaving him no choice but to respond to the lawsuit. His statement was full of heartfelt appeals and won him a great deal of sympathy. I, on the other hand, was crucified by public opinion, bombarded with vicious comments from all sides. My phone rang off the hook, and obsessive fans even gathered outside my apartment shouting obscenities and threats. During that time, Stella and I couldn't even leave the house. "Aunt Evelyn, don't look at this stuff," Stella would say, taking my phone and closing the app filled with unbearable comments. She would wipe the tears from my face with her small hands. "Those people are all bad. They don't know anything." I would hug her, my heart as cold as ice. I thought I could ignore it, but I had overestimated myself. Those vicious words were like sharp knives cutting me to pieces. On the day of the trial, the courthouse was swarmed with reporters and onlookers. I dressed in shabby old clothes, walked through a barrage of camera flashes and suspicious gazes into the courtroom. Julian, on the other hand, arrived calmly in a crisp suit surrounded by several bodyguards. The atmosphere in the courtroom was solemn. My young lawyer, Mr. Park, did his best. He presented my college sketches to the judge, explaining from a professional angle the close connection between these sketches and the final version of the Cloud Atlas Tower. But it was all circumstantial evidence. When it was the defense's turn, Julian's lawyer was extremely confident. He first called several of our former classmates as witnesses, people who had received help from Julian in the past and were naturally on his side. "Yes, I remember a man with glasses said. Evelyn did draw some similar sketches back then. But that was all just immature fantasy from our student days. It's completely different from Mr. Vance's great work of today. Mr. Vance was full of ideas even back then. He often discussed his vision for future architecture with us. He had been talking about the concept of the Cloud Atlas Tower for a very long time." Another woman chimed in. Their testimony easily negated all my efforts. Next, Julian's lawyer produced a thick stack of evidence, including meeting minutes, design revisions, and email exchanges between Julian and his team from the beginning of the Cloud Atlas Tower project to its completion. All the evidence formed a perfect chain, proving that the tower was the result of the hard work of Julian and his team and had nothing to do with me. I looked at the so-called evidence, shaking with rage. It was all fabricated. He had erased every trace of me and was now using fabricated facts to nail me to a pillar of shame. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, overwhelmed with emotion, and pointed at Julian in the defendant's box. "Can you say you didn't steal my design? Look me in the eye and say it again, that the Cloud Atlas Tower has nothing to do with me." Objection. Julian's lawyer immediately stood up. The plaintiff is becoming emotional and engaging in personal attacks. The judge slammed his gavel, warning me to control my emotions. From beginning to end, Julian looked at me with an expression of pity and helplessness. In his closing statement, he even pretended to be magnanimous, saying, "Your Honor, I know that Evelyn is not well. She is in a very unstable mental state. I hope the court will consider her special circumstances and not hold her accountable for the damage she has done to my reputation. I just hope that she can put the past behind her and start a new life soon." His performance was perfect. He portrayed himself as a saint who was being falsely accused by his crazy ex-wife, but was repaying evil with kindness. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. The judge ruled on the spot that the plaintiff's evidence was insufficient and dismissed the case. Furthermore, he ordered me, the plaintiff, Evelyn Reed, to publicly apologize within 3 days for fabricating facts and seriously damaging the defendant Julian Vance's reputation. I lost. I had lost completely, utterly. Not only had I failed to get justice, but I had been branded a liar by the court and was now ordered to apologize to the thief who had stolen everything from me. Could there be anything more absurd and ridiculous in this world? Leaving the courthouse, I was in a daze. Reporters swarmed me like sharks, smelling blood, shoving microphones and cameras in my face. "Miss Reed, what do you think of the verdict? Will you apologize to Mr. Vance? Do you regret filing this lawsuit?" I couldn't say a word. I just managed to push through the wolf-like crowd under the protection of Mr. Park. Back home, I locked myself in my room. No matter how much Stella knocked, I wouldn't open the door. I lay on the bed, pulling the covers over my head, feeling surrounded by the darkness and evil of the entire world. I was wrong. I was wrong from the very beginning. It was wrong to believe that there was such a thing as justice and fairness in this world. How could a powerless ant like me defeat an elephant like Julian? All my struggles were just a self-humiliating comedy. Maybe I should have just jumped from that bridge. At least then I could have preserved my last shred of miserable dignity. My life was now completely hopeless. Just as I was about to be completely consumed by despair and the thought of dying returned, a sudden, urgent, and powerful knock came from the door. "Aunt Evelyn," Please open the door. Aunt Evelyn. It was Stella's tearful voice. I didn't move, just burrowed deeper under the covers. Miss Reed, please open this door, another voice came. An old voice full of authority but also tinged with an undeniable anxiety. That voice. It was Professor Finch. My body trembled violently. My chaotic mind suddenly cleared. He was back. I stumbled out of bed and almost crawled to the door. With trembling hands, I opened it. Outside stood an old man with white hair but a sharp spirit. He was wearing a well-fitted suit, his face was thin but his eyes were piercing. The years had left their mark on his face, but I recognized him at once. The master of architectural design, Sophia's father, Professor Arthur Finch. Beside him stood Stella, her eyes swollen from crying. Grandpa, the moment I opened the door, Stella rushed into Professor Finch's arms. Professor Finch held his granddaughter tightly, his misty eyes welling with tears. He gently patted Stella's back, and then looked up at me with a very complex expression. It was a look of scrutiny, sorrow, and an indescribable familiarity. You are Evelyn Reed, he asked, his voice heavier and more powerful than it had been over the phone. I nodded, my lips trembling, but no sound came out. Let's go inside and talk, he sighed, leading Stella into our small, shabby room. He looked around. When his gaze fell on the messy design drafts on my desk, his pupils contracted imperceptibly. We sat down opposite each other at the small dining table. Stella obediently poured us water. Sweetheart, you go to your room and do your homework for now. Grandpa has something to talk about with Aunt Evelyn, Professor Finch said, stroking Stella's hair fondly. Stella nodded maturely and went into the bedroom, looking back several times. Only Professor Finch and I were left in the living room. A heavy silence fell between us. I heard about the lawsuit. Professor Finch broke the silence first, his voice laced with a bit of anger and reproach. You were too rash, challenging a fully armed beast with no preparation at all. The result could only be self-destruction. Tears I could no longer hold back streamed down my face. I'm sorry, Professor. I was just so wronged. And you think you're the only one who's been wronged. Professor Finch's eyes flashed with extreme sorrow and anger. That animal, what he stole wasn't just your hard work. It was also the last piece of work my daughter Sophia left in this world. My heart felt like it was being torn apart. Professor, you knew. Of course I knew, he said, taking a thick folder from his leather briefcase and slamming it on the table. The Cloud Atlas Tower. Its original name was Airy. It was the senior thesis project you and my Sophia created together. I have all of their original sketches, design journals, and hundreds of emails they exchanged for that design. He spread the documents out in front of me. I saw the familiar handwriting, saw Sophia's vibrant signature. I even saw the email conversations where we had argued passionately about a structural detail. Everything was as vivid as if it were yesterday. My Sophia had a habit since she was a child. Professor Finch's voice was full of longing. She would send me a copy of every important piece of work for my opinion. For their senior thesis, I was involved in the entire process, from the initial concept to the final completion. I know every detail, every philosophy in it like the back of my hand. Then, my voice trembled with excitement. Then the so-called evidence Julian presented is all fabricated. That's right. A sharp coldness flashed in Professor Finch's eyes, that ungrateful wretch. Back then, Sophia took pity on him for being poor and let him join the group to help with menial tasks like organizing materials and making models. He never had access to the core philosophy of this design. He must have used some despicable means to get the completed digital files from Sophia. I checked. Professor Finch's face grew grim. Just before Sophia's car accident, Julian had asked to borrow the entire set of thesis materials using his studies as an excuse. My kind-hearted Sophia, without any suspicion, gave everything to him. She never would have dreamed that she was letting a wolf into her house. The pieces of the truth finally fit together perfectly. So that was it. Julian had been targeting this design from the beginning. He had used Sophia's kindness and my love and trust in him to make our blood and sweat his own. Sophia's sudden death had only made him bolder, thinking that this secret would be buried forever. But he hadn't counted on one thing. The most original and complete evidence was in Professor Finch's hands. Professor, then we can... I looked at him with excited eyes as if I had seen the dawn of revenge. Not yet. Professor Finch shook his head, gesturing for me to calm down. Julian has powerful backers now with the Sterling family behind him. If we present this evidence now, he'll just claim that we fabricated it out of spite after losing the lawsuit. To completely destroy him, to make sure he can never get back up, we must prepare the most magnificent and the most brutal stage for him. A stage I didn't understand. A cold smile appeared on Professor Finch's lips. Do you know who the chairman of the Pritzker Prize jury is this year? I shook my head. It's me, he said slowly, revealing a fact that left me stunned. A flame of vengeance burned in his eyes. And Julian. He would never dream that the work he believes will bring him the highest honor is actually the key that will lead him to hell. I understood everything in an instant. I looked at the old man before me. Though he was old, his meticulous planning and the determination in his eyes gave me an infinite sense of security. Evelyn, Professor Finch looked at me, his gaze very serious. I know you've been through a lot, but I need you to stand up again. When Sophia was alive, she always told me that you were the most talented and pure designer she had ever met. She always regretted that you gave up your dream. Now is the time. He stood up, walked over to me, and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. It's time to take back the glory that belongs to you and Sophia. Do you have the courage? I looked up and met his expectant gaze, felt the strength coming from his hand. All my grief, injustice, and despair transformed into infinite courage and strength in that moment. I slowly straightened my back, and I answered word by word clearly and firmly, yes, I do. Judgment Day. After that day, my world was turned upside down. Professor Finch kept his word. He began to pave the way for me, using his formidable influence in the industry. The first thing he did was to remove my worries. He hired the best legal team in the country and sued Stella's relatives for abuse and extortion. Faced with irrefutable evidence, they quickly confessed and were sentenced to prison. Custody of Stella was smoothly transferred to Professor Finch. With Stella's situation resolved, Professor Finch poured all his energy into his plan for me. He didn't release the evidence right away. Instead, he did something more important. He helped me regain my identity and confidence as a designer. For a designer, the best weapon isn't argument but work, he told me, taking me to his studio downtown. From today on, you are to forget about Julian the lawsuit and all the hatred. You have only one job to design. Create a piece of work that will silence everyone in your best condition. His studio was like a giant treasure trove filled with countless precious architectural models and a vast collection of professional books. Here, I felt like I had returned to my college days, my passion for design reawakened. Under Professor Finch's direct guidance, I studied and created day and night. He was the strictest teacher analyzing my past designs and pointing out their flaws, and the kindest father guiding and encouraging me, unreservedly passing on his lifetime of knowledge and experience. My design skills improved by leaps and bounds during this period. I was no longer confined to small-scale interior design. My vision and scope expanded infinitely. I began to attempt bolder, more conceptual architectural designs. Meanwhile, Julian's career was at its peak. The divorce and lawsuit had caused a brief stir online, but under his powerful PR strategy, it quickly died down. Not only was he unaffected, but his victim image had even won him more sympathy and support. His wedding to Chloe Sterling proceeded as planned. It was an extremely lavish affair, the talk of the town. The media hailed them as a golden couple, a match made in heaven. I watched the news of their wedding on the TV in the studio. In the footage, Julian was handsome, and Chloe was radiant. They exchanged rings and kissed deeply, receiving the blessings of everyone present. My heart felt no ripples. I just watched it calmly as if it were a soap opera that had nothing to do with me. Then I turned off the TV and continued to revise my drawings. I knew that the higher they stood now, the more tragically they would fall later. Time passed quietly as I drew day after day. A month later, I completed a brand new design proposal. It was a community library with the theme of rebirth. The entire building adopted a spiral, upwardly opening structure like a tree of life sprouting from the earth. I perfectly integrated the philosophies of environmental protection, sharing, and humanistic care into the design. When I submitted the proposal to Professor Finch, I was nervous. He held my drawings and looked at them for a full hour without saying a word. Just as I thought he was going to reject my work, he looked up at me. A rare, gratified smile appeared on his usually stern face. "Evelyn," he said, "congratulations, you've graduated." My eyes instantly grew hot. I knew that this graduation meant that I, Evelyn Reed, was no longer a muse hidden behind someone, but a true designer who could stand on her own. Now the stage is set. Professor Finch took a gold-embossed invitation from an exquisite envelope and handed it to me. "It's time to go and take back what is yours." I took the invitation. The words Pritzker Architecture Prize Ceremony were printed on it. And in the guest's name section, to my astonishment, was my own name, special invited emerging designer Evelyn Reed. I couldn't believe my eyes. As the jury chairman, I specially recommended you and your seed library design to the organizing committee. Professor Finch's eyes glinted with wisdom. Your work received unanimous approval from all the judges. They are all very curious and expectant of this mysterious new designer from the East. He paused, a cold smile on his lips. At the awards ceremony, you will go on stage as a special guest to explain your design philosophy. And I have arranged your appearance time to be right after the award for the Cloud Atlas Tower project and right before Julian's acceptance speech. My heart began to pound uncontrollably. I finally understood his entire plan. He didn't want a private confrontation or a courtroom battle. He wanted to, at the highest hall of the world's architectural community, under the spotlight of the global media, make Julian fall from heaven to hell in an instant. What incredible boldness and what cruel revenge! Evelyn, are you afraid? Professor Finch asked, his eyes burning as he looked at me. I took a deep breath and clenched the invitation in my hand. The thin piece of paper now felt as heavy as a mountain. It carried not only my revenge, but also Sophia's legacy and the ultimate dignity of a designer. I looked up and met his gaze and shook my head. No, I'm not afraid. My voice was calm and firm. I'm a person who has already died once. I have nothing left to fear. The Pritzker Architecture Prize ceremony was held at the National Grand Theater. This event, known as the Oscars of the architectural world, brought together the world's top architects, the most authoritative critics, and hundreds of media outlets. I stood in the dressing room backstage, looking at the unfamiliar self in the mirror. Professor Finch had hired the country's top styling team for me. I was wearing an elegant gown custom-made by a famous designer. The color was a subtle moonlight shade between white and gray, understated yet exuding an indescribable strength. My hair was styled in a simple and elegant updo, and my makeup was light but exquisite. The person in the mirror was calm and composed, her eyes holding a placid fortitude that came from having weathered all storms. She was a completely different person from the woman who had given up on everything on that bridge a few months ago. Aunt Evelyn, you look so beautiful today. Stella, dressed in a little white dress like a small angel, ran over and hugged me. Today she was my lucky star and one of the most important audience members of this grand finale. You look beautiful too, my little princess, I smiled and stroked her hair. The dressing room door opened and Professor Finch walked in. He was still in his familiar suit, but today he wore a badge on his chest, indicating his status as the jury chairman. Are you ready? He asked. I nodded. Remember, he looked into my eyes and said, seriously, tonight you are not an avenger. You are a designer. Your weapon is not hatred, but your professionalism and talent. Win this war the way a designer would. I understand. I took a deep breath and suppressed all my emotions deep in my heart. He was right. Hysterical accusations would only make me a laughingstock. Only the calmest, most professional presentation could deliver the most fatal blow to Julian. At 8 p.m., the ceremony officially began. I sat in the front row in the very center with Professor Finch and Stella. Next to us sat the triumphant Julian Vance and the gorgeously dressed Chloe Sterling. When Julian saw me sitting with Professor Finch, a look of extreme surprise and confusion flashed across his face, but he quickly regained his composure and even nodded at me with a hypocritical smile. He probably thought I was here as a junior of Professor Finch, just to broaden my horizons. Chloe, on the other hand, made no secret of her contempt and disdain for me. She clung to Julian's arm, deliberately flashing the huge diamond ring on her hand in front of me, and mouthed silently, "Loser." I ignored them and just looked calmly at the stage as if they were just two irrelevant pieces of obelisk air. The ceremony proceeded in order. Finally, it was time for one of the night's most important awards, the Best Skyscraper Design of the Year. The winner of this year's Pritzker Prize for Best Skyscraper Design is, the host's excited voice dragged on, the Cloud Atlas Tower from the United States. Let's welcome the designer, Mr. Pritz. Julian Vance to the stage. The hall erupted in thunderous applause. The spotlight fell on Julian. He stood up, adjusted his tie, a perfect victor's smile on his face. He hugged Chloe by his side and then walked confidently toward the stage of glory. I watched him quietly, watched him receive the heavy trophy, watched him stand in the center of the stage, receiving the attention of the whole world. I knew that this was the most glorious peak of his life, and it was also about to be the beginning of his fall. Thank you. I sincerely thank the organizing committee and all the judges. Julian began his prepared acceptance speech into the microphone. He thanked his team, his family, and everyone who had supported him. His voice was charming, his words impeccable. Finally, he said, I want to once again thank my ex-wife, who gave me the initial inspiration. Although she has hurt me with some misunderstandings in the past, I believe that at this moment, wherever she is happy for me. He even bowed hypocritically to the audience. Another round of benevolent applause erupted from the audience, everyone deeply moved by his magnanimity in repaying grievances with virtue. What a performance! Just as Julian finished his speech and was about to leave the stage, the host suddenly spoke up. Mr. Vance, please wait a moment. The host smiled. After sharing in your joy, we have a special segment prepared. Tonight we have invited a talented emerging designer from the East. Although her work has not yet been built, its unique design philosophy has already captivated all of our judges. The judges unanimously agree that she represents the future of architectural design. Now let's give a warm round of applause to welcome this mysterious guest, Miss Evelyn Reed. She will give us the most in-depth design interpretation of the Cloud Atlas Tower project. The host's words were followed by a strange silence in the hall. Everyone froze, including Julian, whose smile had completely stiffened on stage. I slowly stood up. Under the shocked gazes of everyone tracked by countless camera lenses, I walked calmly, step by step, onto the stage. The moment the spotlight hit me, I felt no nervousness at all. I could feel the coldness of the microphone in my hand, and I could see Julian's face in the audience instantly turning pale, filled with horror and disbelief. I walked onto him and gently took the trophy that should have been mine from his hand. Then I turned around, faced all the audience and cameras, and gave a faint smile. Hello, everyone. My voice, amplified by the microphone, echoed clearly to every corner of the Grand Theater. My name is Evelyn Reed. The work, Cloud Atlas Tower. I happen to have some of my own interpretations of it. Because you see, I drew its very first blueprint. Like a single drop of water setting off a tidal wave, my words plunged the Grand Theater into chaos. Guests in the audience whispered amongst themselves, and the flashes from the press section went off frantically, trying to capture this dramatic moment on stage. Julian's face could no longer be described as pale. It was ashen, completely drained of blood. His lips trembled as he tried to say something, but no words came out. He could only stare at me as if he had seen a ghost. Miss Reed, what do you mean by that? Even the host, clearly unprepared for this turn of events, struggled to maintain his professional composure, stammering. I ignored him. I didn't even look at Julian, who looked like he was about to collapse beside me. My gaze calmly swept over all the shocked faces in the audience, finally resting on Professor Finch in the front row. He gave me an encouraging look. I took a deep breath and translated all my emotions into the calmest, most professional language. Ladies and gentlemen, my voice was not loud, but it had an undeniable penetrating power. To truly understand a building, you must first understand its soul. And the soul, or the original design philosophy of the work Cloud Atlas Tower, can be summed up in one word: commemoration. I paused, then continued slowly. The original name of this design was Airy. It was created to commemorate one person, the most important friend in my life, a talented designer who unfortunately passed away at a young age, Miss Sophia Finch. The moment I said Sophia's name, Professor Finch, sitting in the front row, slowly stood up. All the cameras instinctively turned to him. Professor Finch, someone in the audience who recognized him, exclaimed in surprise. That's right, I continued, my voice tinged with the warmth of reminiscence. Sophia and I were college classmates and best friends. We always had a dream to build a home in the cold concrete city, where all tired souls could find a poetic resting place. This home had to be as free, light, and all-encompassing as the clouds in the sky. That's why we named it Airy. As I spoke, the large screen behind the stage began to display photos of me and Sophia from our college days, prepared in advance by Professor Finch. It was the most real and convincing evidence. In the photos, two young women were smiling brightly and carefree. Behind them was a somewhat crude model, the earliest prototype of the Cloud Atlas Tower. For this design, we researched hundreds of ancient texts, studying the interlocking structures of traditional architecture and the philosophy of the harmony between man and nature. We wanted this building to be filled with Eastern wisdom and charm both inside and out. My voice, as if by magic, gradually quieted the noisy venue. Everyone was captivated by my story, a story of dreams and friendship. Why does the main structure of this building have this spiral ascending form? I turned and pointed to the rendering of the Cloud Atlas Tower on the large screen, beginning to reveal my true weapon. Because it is modeled after the form of a traditional Celtic knot. Each floor represents a memory, and the semi-open-air garden on the top floor, we called it the Pavilion of Remembrance. We designed the most complex circulating water system there, so that when the wind blows, the flow of water would drive the wind chimes, creating a celestial sound. It was our gift of remembrance to our friend in heaven. As I spoke, the large screen displayed detailed explanations and original sketches with timestamps that I had never made public. The entire evolutionary process, from the initial sketch to the final product, the revision of every detail, the deepening of every philosophy was clearly laid out before everyone. This was the true history of a work's growth, something Julian could never fabricate. How could the load-bearing structure of this building be made to feel so light as if it were floating in the air? Because Sophia and I jointly improved on a bracketing structure. We replaced the traditional wooden brackets with modern composite materials, and through precise calculations, transferred the force to the central core. And why is the cross-section of this central core in the shape of an infinity symbol? Because it symbolizes reincarnation and return. I didn't utter a single accusation, not a single curse. I just spoke in the most professional language, like a mother, introducing her most beloved child to the world. I spoke of its birth, its bones, its blood, its soul. My explanation was calm and objective, yet full of power. Every technical term, every design detail was like a sharp scalpel stripping away the glamorous clothes of Julian's emperor, layer by layer, revealing the ugliest, most pathetic truth within. The audience had already shifted from initial shock to dawning realization. They looked at me with respect and sympathy. Then they turned to Julian. Their gazes were now filled with undisguised contempt and anger. So that's it. He's a thief. My God, he even stole his dead friend's work. He's worse than an animal. It was Professor Finch's daughter's work. No wonder the professor himself showed up. Julian had completely collapsed. His face was ashen, his body trembling like a leaf, and he kept mumbling, "No, it's not like that." My explanation finally came to an end. I turned and looked at Julian one last time. "Mr. Vance," I looked at him calmly, as if he were a stranger. "Do you still believe that the design inspiration for the Cloud Atlas Tower came from me?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "No, you're wrong," I shook my head. And then, in a tone that was almost a judgment, I said clearly, word by word, its inspiration came from friendship, from dreams, and from the purest love that Sophia and I had for this world. And you, Julian, are not qualified to speak of it. After saying that, I quietly placed the heavy trophy I was holding back on the podium. And then I turned, and amidst the thunderous and unending applause that erupted in the hall, I walked confidently off the stage. I knew that this judgment carried out in the name of design was over. And Julian's life was also over. A new beginning in the name of hope. The storm at the new beginning in the name. Awards ceremony and its aftermath were more powerful than anyone could have imagined. The next day, the headlines of major media outlets around the world were dominated by titles like Pritzker's biggest scandal design, Genius is actually a shameless thief. The video of my calm and professional judgment on stage that night went viral online. The name Julian Vance fell from heaven to hell overnight. His scandals plagiarizing his deceased colleague's work, deceiving his partner, and even the possibility of fabricating evidence and bribing witnesses were all dug up by angry netizens and the media. He and his company were immediately boycotted and ostracized by the entire industry. Chloe Sterling's father, the chairman of the design firm, in order to protect himself, immediately announced that he was cutting all ties with Julian and firing him. Chloe herself unilaterally broke off their engagement 3 days after the scandal broke. When the tree falls, the monkeys scatter. When the wall is pushed, everyone joins in. The people who had once flattered him now avoided him like the plague, some even turning to throw stones. He soon declared bankruptcy due to failed investments and financial difficulties and was buried under a mountain of debt. I no longer paid any attention to his story. He was no longer a person worth wasting even a shred of my emotions on. Professor Finch transferred all the copyrights and profits of the Cloud Atlas Tower project to a foundation established in my and Sophia's names. This foundation would be used to support talented but financially disadvantaged young designers so that they would not, like the Julian of the past, have their humanity twisted by poverty. And I too had a new life. My seed library design caused a huge sensation after the awards ceremony. Many investors and local governments reached out to me expressing their desire to bring this design to life. With Professor Finch's support, I established my own design studio. I named it Evelyn Reed Studio. I was no longer someone's muse, no longer someone's rock. I was Evelyn Reed, an independent, confident designer who could stand tall in this world with my own talent. On the day the studio opened, I received an unexpected package. Inside was my latest medical examination report. On the last page, the words were clearly printed: benign gastric tumor, successfully removed via minimally invasive surgery. Prognosis: excellent. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. Benign, not terminal cancer. There was also a letter in the package from Professor Finch's legal team. It stated that while investigating Julian's financial problems, they had accidentally discovered a large sum of money he had transferred to the attending physician at the private hospital where I was first diagnosed. Upon investigation, the doctor confessed to the crime of accepting a bribe and falsifying my medical records, diagnosing my benign tumor as terminal cancer. So that was it. It was a scam from the very beginning. A cruel, elaborate scam designed to get rid of me, his wife, at the lowest possible cost. He had not only tried to take everything from me, but had also tried to sentence me to death mentally. I held the report and stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of my studio, looking at the bright sunlight outside. Suddenly, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't cry, nor did I laugh. I just thought that Julian was truly a pitiful person. He had spent his whole life calculating and taking, but he had never experienced what true love was, what true creation was. I had lost everything and fallen into an abyss, but in the end, with the help of a tiny bit of kindness and love, I had climbed back up and seen a wider sky. "Aunt Evelyn, what are you thinking about?" Stella ran over and hugged my waist. From behind, she had grown a lot, no longer the thin and timid little girl. Under Professor Finch's careful guidance and my care, she had become more and more confident and cheerful. Her talent for drawing was also beginning to show. "Oh, nothing." I turned around, smiled, and stroked her hair. "I was just thinking about how to design our new home. I want a big floor-to-ceiling window so I can see the stars. Okay. And an art studio, with lots and lots of art supplies. Okay. And I want Aunt Evelyn to be with me. Forever." She looked up at me, her eyes full of reliance and love. I bent down and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. "I promise. I will be with you forever." In my studio, there is an exquisite frame. Inside, there is no amazing painting or award certificate. There is just a crumpled, framed $5 bill. It always reminds me that on that rainy night, in the darkest and most desperate moment of my life, it was this tiny bit of kindness, this little angel who crashed into my life, who pulled me back from the brink of death, and gave me a brand. New life. I am Evelyn Reed, and my life, just like my studio, was just beginning.